I'm wondering for you, when you find yourself in a transition point in your own life, do you have a go-to question that helps you navigate the uncertainty or get you started? I'm just asking for a
Yeah.
friend here.
Yeah. So the best answer to that is just to ask. I think we often have this fixation on what is the perfect question. The most important thing is developing your own art of great questioning. There isn't any one particular question that's magic. Having said that, I won't step around what your question was. There's one that haunts my mind and my thinking in a good way, ongoing, and it's
What if the questions that you're asking right now are actually keeping you stuck? I've been there. 6 years into this podcast, I've talked a lot about curiosity, about reinvention, about what's possible when we stop listening to the voice that says it's too late. And a lot of what I've shared has come from my own experience of stumbling toward a better life by asking better questions. But today, I get to go deeper. My guest, Larry Robertson, has spent decades working at the crossroads of creativity, leadership, entrepreneurship, and now great questioning. He's an innovation advisor, a Fulbright scholar, a columnist, a speaker, and yeah, the author of 4 award winning books, 21 awards between them, if you're counting. And his latest book is called Great Question: The Art of the Ask and Getting More of What You Really Want. I have to tell you, I did not plan to have a guest for this particular episode. I had a solo topic all ready to go, but then Larry reached out through our mutual friend, Lynn Borton. She's the host of the Choose to Be Curious podcast, and she's been on this podcast before. Anyway, Larry and I got on a call, and that call was so easy and rich that I actually wish I'd been recording. And that was that. I immediately knew that I wanted to celebrate this anniversary by asking Larry some questions about what makes a great question. What is the art of the ask and why does it matter? I'm so excited for this conversation. 6 years of asking questions here about reinvention and what's actually possible as we age. And it turns out I've only scratched the surface. Larry Robertson, welcome to Late Bloomer Living. Thank you so much for being with me.
what a great introduction. It is a pleasure to be here. I felt the same when we first talked that it just was so natural, and so I'm glad we get to extend it into a shared conversation with lots of people.
Me too, me too. And just thank you, Lynn.
Absolutely. I feel like I should thank her and to some exponent, it's just the things she does to bring people together and to make us curious are just wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so you opened your research in your book by asking each of your 140 interview subjects the same first question. And I want to ask you that same question. What is a question?
It's
And a
so,
follow up, wait, a
yeah,
follow up to
yeah,
that I have for you is, are you still asking that question even
absolutely.
now?
To
Okay.
to to answer the follow-up first, absolutely. And one of the reasons is that when I asked people that question, two things were very clear. One was they'd never been asked that question before. They'd never really consciously asked themselves, what is a question? I don't think any of us do
It seems
because
basic, right?
it does seem basic and familiar.
Hmm.
And when somebody says, my gosh, why do we need to learn about questions? The reason we fall to is, well, they're everywhere in our life, and that is true. But we're never really taught to question greatly. We never really think about questions and what more power and potential they could have. So it was a surprise when I asked people, what is a question? And yet, they knew exactly where they wanted to go in answering it. So it was if they had been subconsciously aware of a question, and most of all, how big and powerful questions are, because every single one of them, and I interviewed over 140 people, they went big. What I mean by that is you could say, well, a question is something you ask to get an answer. A question is a tool to get you from here to there or out of a stuck situation into an unstuck environment.
Hmm.
But they didn't go there. They talked about the greatness of questions. They talked about the power that questions can bring to change something, to create something, to connect things together. And I think it's really fascinating that we have that sense of the greatness, of the potential of a question inside of us, but we don't consciously think about it. And therefore, we don't really delve into how can we be in that great zone more often.
What does it give us to be in the great zone?
One of the biggest things that a question gives us is the invitation to do lots of things, not just to give an answer, but to pause, to think, to reflect, both backward and forward, to connect to somebody, even to lead us to the next question, which is usually the more valuable one, the questions that follow the questions. So, in all of those things, that's what you get out of a question, but you're also doing these other things, which actually are other answers to what is a question. You're tapping into a natural behavior. So, a question is a form of behavior. When you do it often enough, you end up creating a framework for how you see the world. A question is also a framework. And most importantly, a question is central to who we are. We talk often about being a storytelling species, but at the true core of us, we are a questioning species. It drives our stories, it drives our curiosity, and it drives how we evolve and how we thrive. But it's definitely a part of who we are. And I think we undervalue that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that struck me as I was reading, you talked about how we're born questioning, even pre-language. We're
Yes.
questioning who's safe to be with and how to get food and how to get warm and all those things, right? And
Yes.
that's pre-language. We're born doing that.
Absolutely, which puts a whole new spin on a question because our tendency is to think it's a series of words that end in the punctuation of a question mark. I mean, that's kind of how we're taught to think about questions. But what you just described is, something that's not only pre-language, it's naturally there. It's an evolutionary capacity that we have to say, oh my gosh, how do I find myself in a safe space? How do I know what safe is? How do I find food? As you said, who do I want to learn more from? Like, which people around me am I attracted to? How do I get attention? All of those things are question asking. They're part of our behavior, even if they don't result in words and a question mark.
Yeah. This is going to be a total tangent. But I was scrolling Instagram as I want to do sometimes yesterday, and I came across this video. It's a narrated thing, and it's this toddler who is feeling the wind blowing on its face, and you're seeing this baby processing with the help of the narration, going, what is this thing, and why does it move my hair, and what the baby isn't really saying anything, but
Yes,
as the narration goes, you're seeing, oh yeah, that probably is exactly what that kid, you're just watching it experience the wind on its face,
yes,
and it made me think that baby is asking questions. What is this sensation?
yes,
Isn't that
yes.
amazing?
It is totally amazing. And I think what's more amazing and compelling to me is that they are asking those kinds of questions, or we kind of think that they are, and I think we're probably right, with two elements being really prominent for them: absolute curiosity and a sense of play.
Yeah.
And those things are naturally within us. It's funny though, and this makes me think back to the theme of this show and the theme of a lot of your work. We forget that along the way. We forget it in the sense of not losing it, but falling out of practice in using it. And that should raise a lot of questions for us, not only why, but what can we do to regain it? And it turns out it's pretty
Yes.
simple.
Yeah. The what, it's almost like the why is like, okay, I think we kind of all know why. It's the how do we get back to it? For,
Yes.
for me, that's my personal inquiry, is how do we get back to that curiosity that we are born with? How do we get back to that playful inquiry of what is this thing we're all doing called life, and what do I want from it next?
Yes. And I love the question words that you're emphasizing, and they are everything but the why. And if you think about it, so there's an author, his name is Angus Fletcher, and he wrote this book called Primal Intelligence. And one of the suggestions he makes is that when we think about things like we were just describing, like how do we regain this way that we questioned in our childhood, he said, go ahead and ask, who, what, when, where, and how, but ignore the temptation to jump right to why.
Mm,
Because why does two things. It either taps into a judgment you've already made,
mm, mm.
or it moves you to make a judgment before you discover all the magic that you might skip over once you have that judgment made. So I think
I
it's
love
really
that.
interesting that those are the questions you emphasize, and I think it's really powerful.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because questions are all about exploration. And I think one of the most powerful things I learned about questions as I did all this research was that there's nothing about a question that really changes anything. A question is just allowing yourself to go there. So you don't have to change a thing. You don't have to go with any of the thoughts you have. You don't really even have to get to an answer. But when you ask questions, you move yourself into a zone where, at the very least, you're going to see things differently and in a new way. So I love that concept of a question being just about allowing yourself to go there.
Love that. I was thinking your four books, they form a progression almost like creativity, entrepreneurship, leadership. What was it?
Rebel leadership. Yep.
Rebel leadership, right? And now questions. How did those books lead you here?
Yeah. It's interesting. The temptation is there to go back and draw a straight line.
Right.
And it was nothing of the sort. But interestingly, the first book was on entrepreneurship, had a lot to do with what my focus was professionally at the time and reflecting back on that. But after that book, which was really a complete re-examination of entrepreneurship in ways that I still think we skip over now, it led me to say, yeah, I think there's something deeper than that. And that's what led to the book on creativity.
Mm,
The book on leadership actually came next, and it was a way of saying, okay, well, especially in uncertainty, right? And the last 25 years have been certainly the most uncertain in recent memory, but you could
crazy
argue,
town.
yeah, in recent history, they've been that way.
Yeah.
So why was it, I was asking myself, are some leaders and some organizations thriving in that uncertainty where most of us are not? And how does that lead us back to thinking about things in an entrepreneurial way or a creative way? Every time I got into those first three subjects, I knew and I could feel deeply how important questions were. And if you look at those other three books, you will see that questions get a lot of attention as being pivotal and important to entrepreneurship, to creativity, and to leadership, especially in uncertainty. But I kept avoiding the fact that questions are something we should look into in and of themselves more deeply to say, well, why is that? Why are they important to those three areas and to others? So that's what really led to this final book about questions. And I think as we talked about before, it was a book I was trying to talk myself out of.
Why
Yeah.
why were you trying to talk yourself out of this book?
Well, I because the realization that I could not ignore that questions had been there in the first three books in big ways really jumped forward for me at the end of the third book, meaning I had just finished it. I had just gone through the trials and tribulations of producing it, and I was busy marketing it, and I was exhausted.
Mm.
So I really didn't want to even think about a next book. And so I spent about 18 months doing research to say, I know this book has been written. So to go out and read all the books, or I know this area has been researched, to go out and read all the research. And the shocking thing that I found was we actually know very little about questions. And we've done very little true exploration of why. What are questions? Why do they span from the functional to the great? What's in between? So that was the pattern was the first thing that pushed me to write this book. The void of knowledge about questions was the second thing. But the real tipping point for me was that over the last 20 years, I've seen this trend globally that we're moving ever more away from questions towards statements. We think we're asking questions, but they're often really making a statement and then just throwing a question mark at the end of it. Or they're questions used to confirm the statement we already have in our head, the answer we have. Or sometimes they're used in a more nefarious way to bait and things like that. Either way, we're moving away from what makes questions great. And so ultimately, that was the tipping point for me to say, okay, it's been there in all these books. It's important to all those topics, but it seems like it's important to us, especially in this time. I better look at that since no one else has looked at it, at least in that way.
Yeah. I have to tell you, I'm with what's happening in the world right now. I experience a lot of stress and anxiety, and uh, one of the only things that has helped me to get through this really uncertain time is to ask questions, is to get curious about, well, okay, what's
Yeah.
happening in the world is happening. So I can either keep fighting it and thinking to myself, this is wrong and this shouldn't be happening, or I can get curious about why it's happening. I went to a why question, didn't I?
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
But what maybe just by opening up the idea of thinking, okay, I can't see the whole picture. And when I can admit that that there's no way I can see the whole picture, it takes a little bit of pressure off me to feel like I need to know the answers to things.
Yes.
And
Yes.
there's some freedom that I find in that. Does I don't even know if I'm expressing that very
Oh,
well.
you absolutely are. And what's so interesting is there's a lot of research that backs that up. And I think the term that Bill Doherty, who's an academic researcher in that area, he refers to it as the relief of self-recognition. I think that's the term that he
Mm,
uses. So
mm,
that when people allow themselves to ask, just the act of asking, even if there's no clear answer, is this acknowledgement of I don't know everything. And it's something that we're very afraid of, not just not knowing, but
mhm.
being caught not knowing. Like we don't like the idea that others might see us or even label us as knowing something less than they do. And yet there's this really interesting other thought that's going on in our head at the same time. And it's the knowledge that we don't know, and that bothers us. We want to know more. We're a learning species. And so one of the people I interviewed said, the key to this is we need to become less bothered by that external impression. We we know we don't know everything, but we don't want the world and sometimes ourselves to know that we don't know everything. It's a matter of how you allow the focus to come down on it. And if you allow the focus to be about the curiosity of not knowing, it's a very freeing thing. It's a very safe thing, even if it doesn't return an exact answer.
Yeah. And I keep pulling all this back to the idea of midlife because I think in midlife and beyond, we feel like we need to look like we have our shizzle together. Like, I don't think I'm the only one who feels this way. You kind of want to be like, I got this. I've been on the planet for a while. Or what is it people like to say? This ain't my first rodeo
Yeah,
or
yes.
whatever, right? So there's those phrases that we carry around with us to say, yeah, I know. And I think that need to look like we have our self together, that we have some expertise, that we have knowledge, it keeps us from being able to get to whatever's next for us because it clamps down on curiosity. It clamps down on the ability to let ourselves be a beginner at
Yes.
something at
Yes.
this age and expose ourselves for not knowing. It makes us vulnerable to, looking foolish.
even what you began with, which is, I don't know, I think we do this subconscious calculation that says, well, I've been on this earth 4, 5, 6, however many decades. I think the world expects that I should have figured something out by now.
Mm-hmm.
And so, isn't it funny? The very first thing we go to, the very first category we go to is, well, what don't I know? Where am I falling short? Why does my picture look incomplete? And I think it's interesting. I don't think we mean that to be a negative, but it really is kind of looking at, well, where are we lesser? Where are we missing? Where might we be judged as one of those two things, lesser or missing? Instead of flipping to, well, where am I powerful? And
Mm.
the ability to ask, even if you just ask yourself, is really arguably the most powerful asset that you have for doing anything. And it can begin with doing the thing of releasing yourself from that pressure of, well, I should have made it by now, or I should be great, or everybody should think I know everything, to, gee, what makes me comfortable? What's my safe space? Who are the people I like to be around? How do I get sustenance that is fulfilling in a soulful way and not just in a physical way? And you're returning right back to those same questions you asked when you were a toddler and didn't have the words to ask the question. You're
Mm.
allowing yourself to go back to the play zone, to go back to the curiosity zone, and to search in that positive way rather than in that way that says, "Oh my gosh, I've fallen short. How do I overcome where I fell short?"
And
It's
that's that whole
reinvention.
self-improvement trap,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
I've been there. I've been in the self-improvement loop.
And it's we talk a lot about it as I like this word, but I also worry about this word. We talk a lot about it as reinvention.
Mm-hmm. It's a tricky word.
It is a
Yes.
tricky word, and I think part of the trickiness to it is it implies that there will be an invention, something tangible, something we can not only label but describe, and other people get it, and so on. My wife prefers the word rewiring, so
Mm.
that it's the same you, it's the same invention or creation, but you're just rewiring how the pieces come together or how you think about it or what you do with it. And in that sense, it's the third word, it's a renewal. You haven't substituted out any parts. They're the same parts, but now with a little rewiring, you're able to do some renewing. And yeah, sometimes that does result in reinvention, even if it's just up here and it's not something we hold.
Oh, I love all that. Ah, love it. The other thing that is coming up, it's funny. This is a prepared question, but everything has brought us right here because when I was preparing for this conversation, I kept coming back to something that truly asking a question, like really asking it, requires some humility. And you have to be willing to not know, as you were just saying. And then I started reading your prologue, and the word humility kept coming up, and I was like, oh my gosh. So I must be onto something here. Was that word humility intentional for you? Did the research lead you there? How did that get in there?
Those are great questions. So, intentional. In the ultimate writing of the book, the answer is absolutely. However, it was in the research for the book that I not only came to that thought, but more specifically, a certain type of humility called intellectual humility. So, intellectual humility means that you recognize not only that you might be wrong or might not know everything, but that you might have to change something because of it. That's real intellectual humility. So this is a really important distinction. It doesn't say you're going to have to do any of those things. It's that you're open and willing enough to accept it if you choose to believe that's what you have to do. It's not, you move it from a fear to an option.
Yeah, but
So
that is scary, right? Like
it's
when
absolutely scary.
to open up yourself to that sort of uncertainty when you have beliefs that might be tying you to your community,
Yeah.
right? I feel like that's a lot of what's going on in the world right now is that people are so locked in to either to their ideologies and their the people that are in their lives that agree with them, that we've got those silos going. And it's scary to question any of it, because what does that mean for our safety and our sense of belonging?
Right. It's scary to question it until you question it. So I think that so I'll tell you two quick stories that point to that. One is about one of the best known creativity and curiosity researchers that I've come across, Susan Engel. She's at Williams College. And when we talked, she told me a story about uh, realizing that so she's Jewish by background, but very conscious of and sympathetic of both sides of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And
Mm-hmm.
during the beginning of the most recent conflict, what she discovered about herself was that she wasn't asking questions about that situation. She was processing it through filters she knew or thought she knew, or ones that were appearing to her, but without any questions being asked. And what was so shocking to her is that that's her practice, is to question everything. That's what she teaches her students. That's what comes out in her research. But because of the fear of going to what felt like a very third rail discussion, even in her own head,
Yeah.
she stopped questioning in total, not just about that topic, but about everything because of the fear. And she said, she told me, who is this Susan? This is not the Susan that I would normally be. So here's somebody who's very expert in using questions and very human in the sense of you can let that fear get so big that you actually stop being who you are. So that's the first story. The second one that I find as if not more fascinating is what this organization called Braver Angels is doing. And
Yes.
and what they do in short is they bring people with extreme red or extreme blue political views together. And they don't know one another and they bring them together in groups and they tell them you're going to get to ask the other side questions. It's a full day workshop that they do this in. What the workshop ends up being is really a training session in how to ask questions because most of them come loaded for bear, ready to just attack the other side with their questions. And
Mm-hmm.
so they're taught, well, do you want a response? Is that really what you want? Do you want, ideas to populate the room when you ask your questions? Okay, if you want those things, if you want advancement in a way, whatever that means for you, then first you have to learn to ask questions. And the most important questions you can ask, they say to the group, are asking questions of yourself, including what are my beliefs? Where do they come from? How did I get to those answers in the form of my beliefs? And the fascinating thing about these workshops is number one, people don't know how to ask great questions. They've never been taught. It's not hard for them to learn, but they don't actually know and they're not in that practice. And the second thing is when they start asking themselves questions, there are a lot more questions around what their beliefs really are, and even around the communities that they associate with and how aligned their beliefs are or aren't. And I only tell you those two stories to say it's a very thin line between these fears we have and the ability to get beyond them by asking simple questions. And I think it's really about how do we go about doing that? How do we ask great questions?
Yeah. While we're talking about this skill of asking questions, you have a framework. Would you want to walk us through the five elements of the art of the ask?
Yeah, I
Is
think
there one that most people struggle with most?
so. I think that the simplest thing is to just tell you what those five elements are, and I'll tell you about an image that I put to them in the book that has everything to do with questions, and that's a raised hand. That's what we do when we want to ask questions. And the five elements just happen to go with really great questions that make us want to stretch our hand sky high to ask. So the first element is core. Questioning is core to who we are. It's saying, what does that mean? How is it core to us? The second element is context. think of it as your pointer finger, where your thumb is core to who you are. This is what makes us unique as human beings, or one of the things that makes it the opposable thumb. The second element of context, it's what we point to with our pointer finger. What is the question all about? Because if we don't understand the context for why we're asking, the question's kind of meaningless. The third finger is an interesting one. This is concession, and it really gets back to that intellectual humility. But typically, what we want to do when somebody challenges our beliefs or has the opposite belief or whatever is to put up that middle finger and only that middle finger and shut down as a listener, shut down as a questioner, and in every other way.
Yeah.
The fourth element is connection. This happens to be the ring finger. This is where we symbolically place something that reminds us of our connection. Connections are what questions are all about, whether it's an idea to an idea, a person to person, a story to story, or a question to question. This is what makes questions powerful on top of all the rest. And the final element is continuation, that this is a practice, that this is an art, that yes, I think of it as a capacity rather than a skill, but by going from that to thinking of it as an art, it becomes something that you have to cultivate ongoing. And I think it's appropriate that it's the pinky finger because we have to remind ourselves to stay committed to that, like a pinky swear. We're going to continue to play with our own individual art of the ask and then hopefully encourage that and overlap that with others.
I love all that. I'm sitting here thinking about how the ask that I have on this podcast is what's really possible as we age.
Mm.
That has been, I think, the ongoing ask that I've
Hmm.
had. And the funny thing is, my original topic for today was going to be a confession to
Ah,
let people know that I am still ageist. So it's not a one and done question, it's a continuing question
yes.
because all of our lives, we've all been surrounded by ageist ideas, ideas about what it means to reach a certain age and then it's all downhill from there. And the question that I keep asking is that necessarily true? And am I just living into that if I believe it without questioning, but I still have ageist thoughts. I'll
Mm.
still see somebody, in traffic in front of me driving slow and think, old man, old woman, you know. And I'm like, wow, Yvonne, come on. You're
Yeah,
better than this. Or I still find myself thinking, oh, maybe I'm too old for that, you know,
sure,
whatever
sure.
that is.
I think one of the things I find fascinating, and one of the things that drew me to you and drew me to this show was the emphasis on story. And story is this super powerful thing that you have plenty of episodes I've listened to that talk about why it's powerful. Here's an addition to that. I think one of the things that limits us, including thinking in an ageism way, not just about others, that person driving in traffic, but about ourselves, is that even without knowing it, we think of stories as being isolated, limited in some way, having an end to them, beginning, a middle, and an end. And what I found so interesting in this research is that stories connect to other stories. Sometimes it's our stories in the past, our stories now, and our stories in the future. Sometimes it's other people. And when we get in a mindset that is that negative ageism as one example that we all get into, right? It doesn't matter how old we are, we often fall into that mindset. There's a good chance that we are thinking in terms of a limited story timeline rather than thinking of the narrative arc that goes across the stories and what the stories say about one another. And when we turn our focus to that narrative arc, we start to see everything differently. So we don't get rid of those thoughts of, ageism. That's a question, right? Does it really apply? Does it really mean anything? Is it harmful? Is it good? Whatever it might be. It's not a getting rid of. It's saying, if I put it in this larger context, is there something else that is said around it or that sees it in a different way? And so I love finding that in the research, this idea of this narrative arc and reminding ourselves we're always working on a new story. So is everybody else. How do those connect for each individual, and how do we connect to one another through them?
Yeah. And I love that you incorporated that whole storytelling element into your book with pairing people up and pairing stories and having that comparison. It's also making me think of, I think the name of the book, Simon Sinek, is the Infinite Game.
Yes, yes,
And the idea that we often approach the game of life, like literally, if you think about the board game, the game of life, there's an end, right? But I love the idea of gamifying our lives in a way that is not about winning, like coming to a winning end, but playing towards an opening, you
yes,
know?
yes. It's like an eternal possibility of betterment.
Mm-hmm.
Like, is there a way that even if this is terrific, what I'm looking at right now, whatever that is there some way that it could be better? Or going further and saying, could better be better? Is there a different definition to better? It's this allowing for this playfulness. One of the people I interviewed, he runs a design firm, and he does this with prospective clients. This is a way you would think to chase prospective clients out of the room. Clients who come in and say, just design it for me. Tell me the price, tell me the timeline, and let's move on.
Uh-huh.
And this guy instead says, let's look at the narrative arc. What was your story before this moment? What do you want the story around this new thing we're designing to be? Where is it you're trying to end up? What does that story look like? How does it impact the other people that connect you? What does that say about how you define what it is you want, or what the definition of value is and all that? And is that possibly better than what you walked in the door with? And so I love that story because he was one of the founders of this design firm, and his partner is the exact opposite. His partner doesn't want to go there. His partner's thinking about the bottom line. But the two of them together makes something more valuable. And I would
Mm.
suggest it's more valuable because Arna, the person I've been talking about, is all about that. Let's step back and look at this story. You don't have to change a thing, but you do need to ask some questions. And it balances out then with what his partner is searching for, which is how can we get a more reliable income stream here and bring more reliable value to our clients? So the two really need one another.
I love that. A little bit of friction goes a long way
Exactly,
sometimes,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
All right. So I think this will be one of my last questions. I'm 6 years into this podcast and I am in my own uncertain transition right now, figuring out what's next for the show and for myself. And I'm wondering for you, when you find yourself in a transition point in your own life, do you have a go-to question that helps you navigate the uncertainty or get you started? I'm just asking for a
Yeah.
friend here.
Yeah. So the best answer to that is just to ask. I think we often have this fixation on what is the perfect question. So the whole orientation of this book is that the most important thing is developing your own art of great questioning. There isn't any one particular question that's magic. Having said that, I won't step around what your question was. There's one that haunts my mind and my thinking in a good way, ongoing, and it's what will you realize soon that you already know? And what I love
Mm.
about that question is it allows me to be in that space of intellectual humility, right? That says, okay, well, maybe I already know it, but it also pushes me into that space of curiosity and questioning and play to say, oh my gosh, I mean, you would think if it was important, it would be sitting right in front of me, obvious. Maybe it's not. How do I get there? So that's a question that I come back to, even though my emphasis is always trying to be on what makes for great questioning. How do I remember the influence of core and context and concession and connection and all the rest?
Yeah. What my brain went to just then when you asked that question, ask it again so we get the right phrasing.
Sure. What will you realize soon that you already know?
Yeah. I just go to the idea of health and wellness. we already know what you're supposed to do
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
be healthy, right?
Mm-hmm.
But do we do it? No. And that question kind of kind of relates in that field to me in a way of what do I already know? Say it again.
Yeah. Yeah. What will I realize soon that I already know?
Right. And how might that change then how you're approaching your daily choices
Yes.
or your habits?
Even you could just say the information that you already have, like you're pointing out some examples on wellness. Maybe you are aware of the data point, but you don't know yet that you already know something more powerful about what that means. Maybe you're employing it not in the wrong way, but in a way that's not working for you.
Hmm.
Maybe you've already concluded that you can't do that. You just got to have that chocolate chip cookie at midday, and so you must be horrible because of it. Well, what if it's something that you already know that lets you see that data in a different way and maybe employ it in a different way? There's something you know within your brain that might even be an unknown within your brain that you just haven't connected the pieces in quite that way yet.
Yeah, and it just occurred to me that there's a way to question that I think shuts down our creativity.
Hmm.
And we'll go back to this health and wellness idea. You could ask yourself a question like, why can't I lose weight? Or why do I always do this? Or why am I not exercising like I should be?
Yes.
And those kinds of questions, they have these negative bias implicit answers that your brain already knows the answer to. Well, I can't lose weight because it lists the things that you already think about yourself.
Right.
And sometimes I think about money, let's say money issues in my life. It's always a struggle financially, right? So I go, why am I still struggling? And there's a question I've started asking recently, which is, how do I make making money fun? And when I ask a question like that,
Yes.
my brain goes, well, is that possible? Is there a fun way to make money?
Yeah.
Is there a way to make money that I feel like if I'm doing it, I would be offering good things out into the world? And it starts a cascade of other questions that I still don't know the answer to, maybe.
Sure.
But my brain is now going to work for me because it implies that maybe there's a solution I haven't thought of yet.
It also, to me, implies that that question is eternal. I mean, is there a limit to the fun? You
I
know,
hope not.
even if you come up with a new way, is that it? You can't ask that question again. I think it helps you
Mm.
to realize that the question can be revisited.
There's that pinky finger, right?
Totally. And in fact, one of the people that I interviewed who said he was very obsessed for most of his career with getting to the right answer and then was opened up to, oh my gosh, it's really about the question. Still had these habits as a person, right? Not as an executive, but as a person that limited him in some way. Why can't I stay with this weight loss program? And his wife had the most wonderful advice to him. She said, why not try something delimiting? And I think your question is one of those delimiting kinds of questions. How can I make X, in this case, a financial situation and solving it, fun? Because there really isn't an endpoint to that. There will be answers, and they might be helpful in the short run, but the question remains unanswered because there is always possibility. And I think those are the kinds of questions we should lean into more if we want to be great questioners.
I love it. And you have a toolkit, right?
Yes, there's so many ways that you can play with questions in your curiosity. So I created an online toolkit that allows you to continue to dip into 100 more and one that will be living that I'll continue to contribute to. Hopefully readers and listeners will contribute to. So it's a place where you can go and play and there's no restriction, there's no membership, there's no you just go and try.
That's really cool.
Yeah,
I got to go
thanks.
check that out. Where can people find you and get a hold of this book?
I appreciate your asking. So the best place to learn all of that and more is my website, my initials, LR, lrspeaks.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being here today to
You
do
know,
this
can
with
I give
me.
you a thank you back? An anniversary is a time for reflection. And I think one of the things that I personally have appreciated most about your show and the episodes that I've listened to across those years is that you do a lot of reflecting and you're doing it through questions. And even though you're looking backwards in some way, you're doing what few do with reflection, and that's also looking forwards as prep work and what can we still do and what new ways can we do it. There are not enough of us out there, and the research would back that up, that are doing both. One, doing reflection at all, but two, not just looking backwards and finding our faults, but looking forwards and saying, what leverage do we have going forward, either from our strengths or our weaknesses or whatever they are. This show is an opportunity to do that, and it's aimed at people at a time in their lives when they should be doing more of that. So kudos. I hope the sixth season isn't the last.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really do feel like this was a gift.
For me too.
And for those of you listening, as I said at the top of this episode, I didn't plan to have a guest today. I had something else ready to go, and I am so glad I threw it out. That's what Larry's whole book is about, isn't it? It's like staying open enough to ask a better question, even though you may think you already have the answer. So, speaking of staying open, if you want to explore curiosity and play, come join my play shop. It's at latebloomerliving.com/play. Let's be curious together and, my friend, bloom like you mean it.